Feeling trapped by outdated cancer treatments? You're not alone. Welcome to Off-ScriptRX, where we break free from the limits of conventional medicine and open the door to revolutionary repurposed medications. I'm Dr. Nathan Goodyear, and this podcast is about disrupting the cancer care status quo. It's time to reclaim your health with treatments they don't want you to know about. If you're ready for a future of real possibilities, you're in the right place. Rethink repurposed medications. Rethink reality. Well, I'm Dr. Nathan Goodyear. Welcome to another Off-ScriptRX podcast. Of course, I'm doing it solo today. Normally, I have a pharmacy with me, and of course, my good friend, Dr. Joe Now, and he'll be joining me in a podcast upcoming next week that we'll be recording. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a lengthy podcast, and so we'll probably carve it up into two segments. I actually already recorded it, but I didn't like it, so wanted to record it again to really focus in on the complexity of statins in a tumor microenvironment centric model and not a tumor centric model. When we're looking at statins, everybody comes to the conversation with a bias. But what I want to focus on here as it relates to statins is both the history, but really focus on how they can be targeted in a precise manner for a repurposed medication in the targeting of cancer, irregardless of whether or not you think, irregardless of whether or not the process contributes to cognitive decline, which I think it can, to dementia, which I think it can, to insulin resistance and diabetes, which I think it can. This is why you have to focus on precision, targeting, patient selection. And this is why it's so important for repurposed medications to use these in conjunction with other therapeutics, but under the guidance of a physician that is knowledgeable in the arena of, first of all, integrative oncology, but second of all, through repurposed medications in the precise targeting. So I want to focus really on introduction to cholesterol and cancer, cholesterol homeostasis pathway. So what's the process of cholesterol? Metabolism, the hallmarks of cancer. We're going to target that in as it relates to cholesterol and cholesterol metabolism here in statins in the hallmarks of cancer. The tumor microenvironment, again, new paradigm in understanding how cancer works. It's not a solid ball of cells isolated from the rest of the body. It's an environment engaging with healthy cells that are non-malignant. Therapeutic opportunities, both alone, but also in combination, synergy, and understand that is really where repurposed medications thrive. They thrive in synergy, and then maybe some challenges and emerging difficulties in the future as it relates to statins as a repurposed medication in oncology. Came across this Telegraph article just the other day entitled, "High cholesterol does not cause heart disease. New research finds so. Treating with statins is a waste of time." Well, obviously, if somebody has severe familial hypercholesterolemia or lipidemia, these could be very helpful there. But in terms of using these in a vitamin-esque type of environment where everybody gets put on them to bring their cholesterol down to 70, that's not healthy. But when somebody has significantly elevated cholesterol levels, obviously they could be used in that manner. But here, again, there we're talking about cardiovascular disease, but here we're talking about a repurposed medication in oncology. And I would say that with statins in the repurposed medication in cancer, it's not a waste of time. It just needs to be targeted. Much of what we see in repurposed medications in oncology is we're seeing a protocol-driven strategy. Everybody gets put on this. Everybody gets put on this combination. Everybody gets put on this dose. And so where people are saying, I'm tired of being treated as a protocol, one size fits all, yet when we move to integrative oncology and repurposed medications, do the same thing. And what we do is we focus on what the evidence tells us and precision and targeting in that. So let's go through the timeline of statin evolution, the historical overview. So from 1976 to 1979, in that time frame, there was a major discovery in this timeline of statins called compactin. And what happened with the compactin is this launched actually the statin drug, quote unquote, revolution, because it was a precursor to the first safe statin drug. 1987, Mevacor or lovastatin was the first FDA-approved statin primarily for hypercholesterolemia. 1991, you'll see that this timeline goes very quickly. 1991, simvastatin and pravastatin expanded the indications of the statins as well as the drugs to include cardiovascular event prevention. So we're talking here about myocardial infarction. So actually preventing events, going ahead of, not just to reduce elevated cholesterol. 1993, fluvastatin or Lescal introduced for hypercholesterolemia and mixed dyslipidemia. 1996, atorvastatin, Lipitor, became a global bestseller, expanding statins' reach again further into the cardiovascular prevention. 2003, rosuvastatin, Crestor, approved later, showing efficacy in primary cardiovascular prevention. That was the Jupiter trial. And then 2009, pitavastatin, it's the latest statin to actually achieve FDA approval for primary hyperlipidemia. And if you check out the show notes at the end of the podcast, you'll actually be able to see the studies as well as go down the rabbit hole of the research rabbit hole, if you will, to dive deep into the research and really be able to cross-collaborate on the concept of this research and learn on your own, empower yourself as it relates to the repurposed medications of statin in oncology. But what about the timeline of statins actually in oncology? A chronology of its discovery. Well, in 1992, laboratory discovery, lovastatin was found to inhibit the transformed, that is, cells going from non-malignant to malignant cell growth. So here in the lab, lovastatin, a statin, was shown to block that transformation of cancer cells from a non-malignant to a malignant nature. 1996, the lovastatin phase 1 trial was the first human oncology trial with high-dose lovastatin that showed it was safe. And it showed that it had biological activity that was anti-tumor, and this was a proof of concept in cancer patients that statins could be used as a repurposed medication in oncology. 1998 to 2000, there was continued ongoing preclinical momentum showing that statins actually induced programmed cell death, apoptosis, and this was done so across diverse cell lines. It led to cell cycle arrest. Cell cycle is how a cancer replicates. One cell becomes two, mitosis. And it actually enhanced chemotherapy sensitivity. 2011, 2015, the mechanisms of the process of how statins interfere with cancer really started to expand, showing that it inhibited epithelial to mesenchymal transition. It suppressed metastasis, and it actually overcome drug resistance, restoring drug sensitivity. In 2016, meta-analysis and epidemiology studies continued to accumulate, showing that its association was its use was associated with reduced cancer-specific mortality, particularly was shown in breast, prostate, and colorectal cancers. In 2017 to 2019, the immuno-oncology crosstalk study was really brought out to the forefront of the consciousness in the scientific field and showed that statins enhanced immune checkpoint activity by modulating T-cell exhaustion, that is reversing T-cell exhaustion. This is a main mechanism of how cancer evade the immune system, is the T-cells, which are important immune cells that are anti-tumor, or can be, they become exhausted, and in turn that allows the cancer to evade the immune system. In 2023 to 2024, ongoing clinical trials continue to investigate and show a broad but very precise anti-cancer mechanism of statins in cancer. Now, I want to look at a conceptual framework here, because what I did is I showed you the timeline of statins, relatively recent one, last 35, 40 years or so, from a cardiovascular perspective, but then also showing, hey, we got an equally delineated timeline as it relates to statins as a repurposed medication in oncology. Again, all variety of them. We'll touch on which ones are best served and which ones are not. But I want to connect this not just into a protocol, not just in a one-size-fits-all approach, but actually targeted to the 14 hallmarks of cancer. That would be sustained proliferative signaling, evading growth suppression, resisting cell death, enabling replicative mortality, inducing or assessing vascularity, that's angiogenesis, activating invasion metastasis, deregulating cellular metabolism, avoiding immune destruction, genomic instability and mutability, tumor promoting inflammation, unlocking phenotypic plasticity, non-mutational epigenetic reprogramming, polymorphic microbiomes, and senescent cells. But then I also want to look at as it relates to these 7 tumor microenvironment niches: hypoxic niche, the immune microenvironment, the metabolic microenvironment, acidic niche, the innervated niche, the mechanical microenvironment niche, and the microbial microenvironment niche. So I want to actually look at the statins in these contexts, because we don't want to just focus, again, on a protocol. We actually want to focus on precise, the right treatment for the right patient at the right time and the right combination. Now, when we look at cholesterol metabolism, the therapeutic targets, we have to understand there's broad windows, if you will. The biggest window of attack is biosynthesis, and we'll go through each one of these. The second is the uptake of cholesterol. The third is efflux. Then down, number 4 is the esterification, and then the last is the trafficking. And so these are broad categories in which, in cholesterol metabolism and overall effects in the body, statins can be indicated to target in the arena of cancer. So let's first talk about cholesterol homeostasis. When we look at cholesterol homeostasis, we have to look at it through four impacts. One, biosynthesis, that's the production of it; the uptake and regulation, trafficking and storage, and efflux. Now, when we talk about biosynthesis, we're talking about the mevalonate pathway, where acetylcoenzyme A is converted to HMG coenzyme A into mevalonate, into isopentenyl diphosphate, to general diphosphate, to farnesyl diphosphate, to squalene, to lancesterol, to cholesterol. That is actually the biosynthesis of cholesterol, what's called the mevalonate pathway. Now, in the uptake and regulation, this is where you're getting uptake of cholesterol by cells. And then trafficking and storage is where you get mobilization of the lysosomal cholesterol and the esterification of the excess cholesterol that's present. And efflux is a process by which cholesterol actually is removed from the cells and transported to the liver for management. So these are key therapeutic handles for intervention for statins as a repurposed medication in oncology. So let's go through the hallmarks of cancer where statins have shown to be indicated and effective. And again, check out the show notes. That's where you'll find the supporting evidence for this discussion. Hallmark 1 is sustained proliferative or growth signaling. Obviously, that makes sense. That's what cancer does. Now, there is a enzyme called a protein called sterol regulatory elemental binding protein 2. Whoever comes up with the names of these things, they ought to be tarred and feathered. But its short is SREBP2. And this is upregulated in many, many common types of cancer. And that's because it's stimulated by chronic inflammation. You'll hear me often say that chronic inflammation is the bed in which cancer lies and the bed in which it proliferates. And here it's upregulating the expression of this sterol regulatory elemental binding protein type 2. And this has impact on oncogenic signaling, that is cancer-causing signaling. So when we look at targeting of proliferative signaling with statins, we have to understand that it's very precise in nature. So let's take simvastatin and insulin growth factor 1 downregulation. In prostate cancer cells, here particularly PC-3 cells, simvastatin inhibits the proliferation of these prostate cancer cell lines, so this is in vitro, by downregulation of insulin-like growth factor 1 receptor. So it's reducing the growth. Also, statins and apoptosis via the Erk pathway. Statins induce programmed cell death in human colon cancer cells. And this again linked to IGF-1 or insulin growth factor 1 alpha reduction, downregulation. And this activates the pro-apoptotic ERK signaling pathways. And then also looking at fluvastatin and FLT3, which is a tyrosine kinase, in inhibition of the FLT3 here, actually in leukemia mouse models actually showed that it increased overall survival. So here we're looking at really 3 different types of statins in mouse models, in animal models and in vitro models, where it's actually targeting broadly different types of cancer cells in different ways. Looking at a second hallmark of cancer, resisting cell death. Obviously, for cancer cells to grow indefinitely or have replicative immortality, it must resist cell death. Cancer cells, or cells in general, have pre-programmed what's called programmed cell death, where if a cancer cell is going aberrant or off the radar, or off the wall, off the chain, what can happen is the cells can trigger the ability to stimulate its cell death. And there's many different mechanisms. There's apoptosis, cuproptosis, ferroptosis, Ferroptosis, all of these are different mechanisms in which this apoptosis, programmed cell death, can actually occur. And when you look at cancer, it's often resistant to ferroptosis, which is via iron. Now, the mevalonate pathway, flux and downstream sterile metabolism, contributes significantly to this resistance of cancer cells to ferroptosis. And this resistance to ferroptosis by the cancer cells increases the tumorigenicity and the treatment resistance. So how do we target cancer cells that have garnered treatment resistance? Here, primarily, we're talking about ferroptosis. And this would then help to overcome the immune suppression or immune evasion that cancer is basically using to evade programmed cell death and the induction of apoptosis the cancer is trying to use. So let's look at simvastatin. Simvastatin will induce apoptosis in human colon cancer cells by downregulating survivin, which is a key anti-apoptotic protein. So by downregulating survivin, a key anti-apoptotic protein, you're upregulating apoptosis or programmed cell death. Also looking at mitochondrial apoptosis via granulation inhibition, looking at mortalized human colorectal cancer cells, simvastatin activates the mitochondrial apoptosis pathway by inhibiting this protein granulation, actually triggering mitochondrial apoptosis. So again, we're not just talking about generalities here, we're actually talking about specific mechanisms of action. I think it's very important to talk about that. It's not just the how, there's going to be the what, it's the how. And when we get into the how, then we have to get into is this in vitro, is it in vivo, is it animal, is it human? What are we dealing with? So what about statins to ferroptosis? Well, we can use statins to induce ferroptosis. That's apoptosis, programmed cell death, using iron. Because see, cancer accumulates iron. It'll actually upregulate the gastrointestinal absorption of iron. It'll upregulate the production of ferritin, the transport of ferritin, which carries many hundreds of molecules of iron. This all gets, you get upregulation of transferrin, you get upregulation of the uptake of the cancer cells by of the iron and the ferritin. You also then get the downregulation of the outflow of the iron and ferritin from the cancer cells. So what you get is you get a buildup of what's called the labile iron pool. And cancer will use this to replicate, particularly as it relates to the spindles. But when we look at statins and ferroptosis, here we're looking at the mevalonate pathway inhibition. And the statins are blocking the HMG coenzyme A reductase and actually depleting all those intermediate signals, the farnesyl pyrophosphate, the general pyrophosphate, and CoQ10. So those of you who take statins know that it often depletes of many different micronutrients, and CoQ10 is front and center. So a lot of people will take CoQ10 to go with the statins to basically protect against that depletion. But what we know is that CoQ10, its depletion actually synthesizes the cancer cell to ferroptosis. And also there's the mechanisms of downregulation of glutathione peroxidase type 4, and this basically is an anti-ferroptotic enzyme. So by downregulating this glutathione peroxidase type 4, suppressing it, you actually upregulate lipid peroxidation, and this is going to trigger apoptosis via oxidative stress. And this is overwhelming the cancer cell's defense or redox capacity to maintain homeostasis. As I mentioned time and time again, everybody wants to focus on repurposed medications as a powerful adjuvant in cancer therapy. And that is exactly correct. And I'm one of the biggest fans. But just as I would say chemotherapy is not the answer to cancer, I would say that repurposed medications, and here statins, are not the answer to cancer. We have to understand that where cancer treatment is going to be best be served is when things are used in synergy, in combination, stacked together in precise nature. So synergy of statins with other ferroptosis inducers enhances the classic induction of ferroptosis. Again, targeting iron, triggering oxidative stress, overwhelming the detoxification capacity of the cancer cell, and actually then triggering apoptosis cell death. Hallmark number 3 is deregulating cellular metabolism. So here's that sterol regulatory elemental binding protein type 2. These are driven programs. These coordinate lipid synthesis and uptake, and this basically manages and regulates the cellular energy status and growth requirements because cancer is rapidly growing. And everybody focuses on cancer using sugar. And that's rightly so. Cancer is going to use anything and everything it can. It can use proteins, it can use fat in a variety of different ways. And so to meet that high metabolic demand, the plasticity of the metabolic activity of the cancer is going to be able to ebb and flow to meet the demands and based on the availability of the nutrients that are there. So in this deregulating cellular metabolism, this upregulated, as I mentioned, sterol regulatory element and binding protein drives the energy status and growth requirements of cancer. Another one that's just going to roll off the tongue, growth pathway that's upregulated in cancer is the P13K mTOR integration. And this is driving the energy anabolic growth rate, and cholesterol synthesis is playing a role in feeding the the PI3K-AKT mTOR integration, promoting the growth. And I love this third one, the hedgehog pathway crosstalk. Hedgehog pathway crosstalk. Now, hedgehog here is not your furry little cuddle pet there at home. Our dog's name is Knox. But hedgehog here is actually a signaling pathway that's upregulated in cancer, forming a feedback loop with sterol metabolism, that is with cholesterol. And it crosstalks, this hedgehog pathway crosstalks with RAS, RAF, MEK, ERK, and the P13K-AKT, PI3K-AKT mTOR, and Notch to promote tumor development, progression, invasion, and drug resistance. And so this crosstalk is actually promoting sustained anabolic growth, cholesterol accumulation, providing the metabolic flexibility to meet the demands of the energy requirements and the nutrients available in the cancer. So statins disrupt the cancer's metabolic engine. They interfere with the cancer's dysregulated metabolism. Yeah, everybody talks about, glycolysis, where oxidative phosphorylation exists, where cancer's energy metabolism is very dysfunctional, the Warburg effect. All of these things are discussed and they're all true, but statins are interfering in that deregulated energy metabolism. Cancer sacrifices efficiency for speed, and so it reduces the number of ATP so that it can actually make energy faster and meet that high metabolic demand. But what that also does is it also reduces the oxidative stress produced as a byproduct of, say, that longer drawn-out process that yields more ATP, oxidative phosphorylation. By going through glycolysis, you can actually reduce the ATP, but also reduce the oxidative stress and allow that cancer cell to push forward in proliferation. But what we know about statins is it creates energetic stress, it creates an energy crisis, and it resensitizes the cancer cells to treatment. So by blocking the mevalonate pathway, inhibiting, again, the HMG coenzyme A reductase, it reduces the synthesis of critical isoprenoids, which are important in the process, that is the farnesyl pyrophosphate, the general pyrophosphate, actually driving that cholesterol synthesis and promoting the growth. It'll impair protein prenylation. The depletion of those same isoprenoids will actually downregulate oncogenic signaling and cellular proliferation. It'll induce an energy crisis, an energetic stress induction, and that's through disruption of the same mevalonate pathway. This induces mitochondrial dysfunction, reducing cellular ATP production. Again, I already talked about that, but here it's where there's not meeting its metabolic demand, and thus that is going to stress it further and make it more vulnerable to treatment, or just outright trigger its cytotoxic death, that is via programmed cell death. But it's also then going to sensitize it to ferroptosis, again, using iron. It's going to reduce the general pyrophosphate, and that's going to promote ferroptosis, compromising the detoxification or antioxidant defenses, which is already compromised in the cancer cells to begin with. And this increases lipid perioxidation, increasing oxidative stress, promoting its death. And so essentially what we're doing here, where cancer has reprogrammed its metabolism, here we're reprogramming the metabolism, where we're reprogramming the reprogramming of the cancer metabolism to one that actually promotes its cell death here. That's the cancer cell. Hallmarks 4 and 5, we're looking at angiogenesis and hypoxia adaptation. Now these are they're different, but they're kind of one and the same. Cholesterol mediates angiogenesis and what's called the angiogenic switch. Now when cancer cells are growing very fast, we focused on the process of the energy adaptation. But understand it has to meet a blood vessel supply that can provide its growth support. Not the blood vessel supply that's already pre-existing, but its new tortuous, irregular poorly generated blood supply, and that's via angiogenesis and neoangiogenesis. And cholesterol is instrumental in promoting, upregulating angiogenesis switch. So hypoxia, which is a low oxygen environment, drives hypoxia-inducible factor 1 alpha transcription, and this upregulates the sterol regulatory elemental binding protein type 2, which I've already talked about, upregulating the carcinogenic process. Further, oxysterols recruit neutrophils to those same hypoxic zones. In the hypoxic zones, what you have then is you have a polarization, a shift from the N1 type neutrophils, which are anti-tumor, to the N2 type neutrophils, which are pro-tumor. Neutrophil recruitment in there is key to the angiogenesis process, which is also driven by the hypoxia and the cholesterol. So the cholesterol accumulation here, more than just the alteration support of the angiogenesis driven by the neutrophils, driven by the hypoxia, it's also supporting cancer stemness. So here we're talking about N1 to N2. That's a plasticity model. That same plasticity or adaptability or reprogrammability also exists in stemness. Did a hot take on cancer stem cells and a podcast on that as well, talking about how the old model of cancer stem cells is a fixed hierarchy, but in reality what we're dealing with is a new plasticity model, allowing us to better understand how cancer cells can pivot from stem activity without stem activity based on its environments and its metabolic needs. So how do we target angiogenesis and hypoxia adaptation with statins? Well, we can disrupt the tumor angiogenesis and the adaptation, which is the adaptation to that hypoxic environment. And understand that's born out of the cancer growing rapidly, outgrowing its blood supply growth, and that's creating the hypoxic conditions, which are going to drive all the mutability that we see with cancer. Well, statins inhibit vascular endothelial growth signaling. So it's going to inhibit these key signals that are going to drive angiogenesis production. By blocking isoprenoid intermediates, it disrupts the vascular endothelial growth factor receptor, and this downregulates VEGF receptors in endothelial and tumor cells. Now, this is dose dependent, meaning the higher the doses, the more effectively it's inhibiting angiogenesis. This is why it's so important to use this in conjunction or guidance of a practitioner that is knowledgeable in the use of statins as it relates to cancer, because if you underdose it, it actually could promote angiogenesis. Statins suppress hypoxia-inducible factor 1 alpha and hypoxia response. Here they're stabilizing the hypoxia-inducible factor 1 alpha, and this is actually, the statins are decreasing the transcription of the VEGF. And this diminishes the tumor's ability to adapt to these low oxygen or hypoxic environments, and thus preventing that switch or angiogenic switch. It modulates, here the statins modulate tumor microenvironment. They normalize the abnormal vasculature, and this improves oxygenation. So remember, I said the angiogenesis process associated with cancer derived from the angiogenesis hypoxia-inducible factor 1 alpha is promoting actually very irregular blood vessel growth, also furthering the hypoxia. Here, the statins are normalizing the blood vessel vasculature supply growth, increasing oxygenation, which is going to increase oxidative stress associated with the cancer, and this is going to block the angiogenic signaling pathways. Hallmark number 6, really 7, depending on how you look at it, because we looked at angiogenesis and hypoxia together, avoiding immune destruction. I would tell you one of the key aspects of any cancer is, can it evade the body's defenses, the immune system? You know, what I always tell patients, the best answer to cancer is never get it. Beyond that, the best answer to cancer is the immune system. If you want to see how important the immune system is to eradicating cancer, look at what the cancer does to take it out. I mean, it does numerous methodologies to actually block it, hide from it, evade it, actually steal from it. So the immune system is key, and in the tumor microenvironment, cholesterol excess actually skews T cells towards exhaustion. So the T cells are exhausted and they can't do their job, and this impairs anti-tumor immunity. In a way, it's immunosuppression, allowing a pro-tumor immunity. The cells are there, they're exhausted. You ever feel that way? I mean, I have a little bit of a cold right now, it may not show, but you just feel kind of run down. You can't do your normal function. And that's what happens here. Because of the cholesterol excess, the T cells, providing the anti-tumor activity, they're just exhausted. They're like, let me take a coffee break. On that, I'll have another sip of coffee. But statins also impair the major histocompatibility type 1 complex recycling and the CD8 T cell recognition of tumor cells. And so this is great because it's allowing, that is with the statins, the ability to re-engage immune surveillance. So what cancer does is it blocks the ability of these T cells to be activated, this major histocompatibility complex to be used to activate the immune system, blocking immune surveillance. But statins are actually reawakening, re-engaging the immune system's abilities to survey the environment looking for cancer. Another mechanism is statins potentiate the ACAT1, which enhances cytotoxicity against cancer cells by boosting CD8 T cells, these are cytotoxic T cells, and increasing T cell receptor signaling and clustering, increasing the immune response. So it's not just the what, but we're also focusing on the how. So statins overcome immune evasion by actively reprogramming the tumor immune microenvironment. Again, cancer is going to reprogram. Statins can help us reprogram and thus convert an immunosuppressive immune environment to a anti-tumor immune environment. And understand that's very key. That is a battle that is ongoing. And the more we keep that immune environment as an anti-tumor and not a pro-tumor, and a immunostimulating, not an immunosuppressive, we can then get ahead, get the immune system activated against the cancer. So statins overcome immune evasion, and they do so by a variety of different mechanisms. One, they downregulate the immune checkpoint programmed death ligand 1, PD-L1 transcription, and this makes cancer cells less able to block cytotoxic T cells or immune targeting, and thus this enhances immune activation and recognition against the tumor. Otherwise, without that, the statins here, it's going to allow it to evade the immune system by upregulation of the immune checkpoint, PD-L1. It enhances T cell function, that is statins, by boosting CD8 T cell infiltration into the tumors. What research tells us about the immune system in the tumor and tumor microenvironments, the majority of tumors are actually what are called desert immune environments. I mean, there's a lack of immune signaling, there's a lack of immune cells in there. So what happens is the immune system just can't see the cancer, and part of that is what the cancer is doing. And here, the statins are going to actually infiltrate the cytotoxic CD8 T cells into the tumor and tumor microenvironment, actually reversing the immune cell exhaustion or lack of immune surveillance. And this will promote upregulation of major histocompatibility type 1 expression, improving antigen presentation and antigen and immune system activation, as well as tumor cell destruction. Statins are synergistic with immunotherapy. Both preclinical and observational human trials have shown improved outcomes when combining statins with immune checkpoint inhibiting therapies. It's a powerful synergistic effect. And also, the statins reprogram the immunosuppressive tumor-associated macrophages. See, it's really important about what happens here. Cancer cells will recruit the immune system to it, but what happens is the environment that's present, whether that be hypoxia, whether that be the redox balance, is there's a pivot of these immune cells. There's a manipulation, adulteration of these immune cells to an immune type, a polarization type, a plasticity or reprogram type, to one that actually becomes favorable to the tumor. So macrophages, a type of immune cell, antigen-presenting cell, are recruited there, M type 1, and then in the presence of the hypoxia and the high iron, that M type 1, which is anti-tumor, will get pivoted or polarized to a pro-tumor macrophage or an M type 2. So here, the statins are helping to overcome the immune evasion by reducing the immune checkpoints, by enhancing T cell function, by synergizing with immune checkpoint inhibiting therapies, and by reprogramming the immunosuppressive environment, all to promote a pro-tumor immune environment. Hallmark 7, activating invasion and metastasis. So obviously, growth into and spread are key aspects of cancer. That's why it's called the hallmarks of cancer. And understand these were described by key or sentinel articles published in 2000, 2011, 2022 by Hanahan and Weinberg. And these really describing the precise nature of cancer doing what it's doing. So how does statins target the invasion and metastasis associated with cancer? Well, statins will actually, oxysterols in the part of the cholesterol metabolism will promote metastatic potential and pre-metastatic niches. Statins come in and block that. Pre-metastatic niches are basically, think of it this way, it's the seed and soil theory. So these seeds of circulating tumor cells and metastatic cells with high potential, they don't just land anywhere. The immune cells, cancer uses immune cells to go ahead and seed and prepare the soil for these seeds to land. Then looking at myeloid-derived suppressing cells and gamma delta T cells, these all are modulated by the cholesterol synthesis or excess, actually breaking the bridge between the innate and adaptive immunity, and this depletes CD8 T cell function. And we get upregulation of Toll-like receptors type 2, nuclear factor kappa beta driven matrix metalloproteinase production, all promoting tumor invasion that then leads to metastasis. And osteotropism, here's this old sterol regulatory elemental binding protein, actually plays a key role in cancer and bone metastasis by promoting bone resorption, allowing the cancer cells to get into the bone, and this promotes tumor growth and also allows for the reactivation of dormant tumor cells in the bone. So this is all the mechanisms by how cancer will activate invasion and promote metastasis. And what happens with statins is statins come in and they block the production of oxysterols. They restore the bridge between the innate and the adaptive immunity, upregulating the CD8 T cells and immune surveillance. They actually remodel the remodeling that was done of the extracellular matrix in the tumor microenvironment, actually decreasing nuclear factor kappa beta, decreasing the matrix metalloproteinases, and reducing the invasion process. And they also, as I've already mentioned, which the sterol regulatory elemental binding proteins are upregulating many cancer types. Here it's inhibited or downregulating, thus reducing the ability for cancer to evade the bone because of the upregulation of osteoclast, but also to reduce the activation of dormant or latent cancer cells. I want to take an opportunity to tell you of a new teaching program that I have online. It's actually a repurposed medication in oncology, where we go through deep dives on repurposed medications in oncology. Not just a superficial look at repurposed medications, but actually what is the history? How did these repurposed medications reach the arena of treatment of cancer as a repurposed medication? How can they be used in conjunction with other conventional therapies or other integrative therapies? What are the pharmacokinetics? What are the pharmacodynamics? What are the toxicokinetics associated with these drugs? So if you want to learn more about how to use repurposed medications as guided by the science, not by Dr. Google, not by Dr. Instagram or Dr. TikTok, where who knows what they're doing, this is actually following the science. So if you want to find out more about this, go to metabolicregen.com today, where you can purchase, download, and go through your first course on repurposed medications. This is module 1. We'll have other modules to come soon, so look out for those. Again, check out metabolicregen.com today. So how do statins hinder the invasion of metastasis, as I already mentioned? Well, they actually decrease epithelial to mesenchymal transition. Epithelial to mesenchymal transition is this process by which there's characteristics of cells that are immobile move to characteristics that are more mobile. The epithelial cells are immobile, the mesenchymal cells are more mobile. So in pancreatic cancer, statins were shown to downregulate genes associated with upregulating epithelial to mesenchymal transition. And this reduced cellular invasion, directly impeding, blocking the metastatic cascade. But statins also augmented chemosensitivity, bolstering the effect of chemotherapy in colorectal cancer cells, inducing cell cycle arrest and apoptosis by downregulation of survivin, which we already mentioned. So what we have here is statins' potential not only to inhibit the primary tumor growth, but also to curb its invasion and its spread. And that's important because 90% of morbidity and mortality associated with cancer is when it spreads. And statins can help there. Again, move aside what you think about statins as it relates to the brain health, dementia, etc. All real. This is why they need to be targeted and used appropriately. We're just looking at what the science tells us about statins, how they can be used to target it. So how do we focus on statins use in metastasis? Well, in liver and colorectal cancer settings, the cholesterol uptake and synthesis critically affects the metastatic potential. We've already talked about the cholesterol buildup and how that's affecting the immune system, and that's a key aspect or a rate-limiting step in immune evasion. So looking at an enzyme called proprotein convertase subtilism Crexin type 9, better is PCSK9. It's an enzyme that regulates the amount of LDL receptors in the liver. And this promotes cancer metastasis by binding to the LDL receptor. This leads to a decreased LDL receptor levels at the cell surface. So this PCSK9 binds to the LDL receptors, decreasing the LDL receptors, and this promotes cancer metastasis. Well, this has been shown to actually drive cell growth, proliferation, ultimately metabolism in many different cancer types, but particularly triple-negative breast cancer. So what do we know about statins as it relates to this metastatic pathway here? Well, the statins will inhibit LDLR receptor inhibition, and this reduces the metastatic competence or capability. It will also downregulate or degrade the PCSK9-driven LDL9, that pathway, and thus reprogram the metabolism, thus enhancing the tumorigenic death rate or countering the enhanced tumorigenic potential and progression. So statins are coming in here and directly blocking that PCSK9 LDR degradation. So this is allowing the upregulation and reprogramming what the cancer is reprogramming, reducing the tumorigenicity and actually reducing the progression of the cancer. And of course here the metastatic implications, here the statins actually reduce the metastatic implication, the competency and the capability. So hallmarks 8 and 9 is looking at genomic instability and inflammation. So cholesterol metabolism significantly influences both the genome, DNA, stability, and the inflammatory processes within the tumor microenvironment. So when we look at the genomic instability, when we look at statins, it actually increases DNA damage. It actually increases the replication stress, all of which will promote apoptosis. It reduces the cell cycle progression. It's going to block the cell cycle. It's going to lead to cell cycle arrest, which is going to block one cell becoming two. That replicative immortality, that proliferation where cells just accumulate. And lovastatin has actually been shown to induce apoptosis in pediatric cancer cells. Now, when we look at inflammation and cholesterol metabolism, but here particularly as it relates to statins, the statins will modulate the immune cell functions, particularly the macrophage polarization, pivoting an M2, which is pro-tumor, to an anti-tumor, M1. It reduces pro-inflammatory cytokines, just involving that same polarization, both macrophages, both neutrophils, but also understand this is also applying to the plasticity related to cancer cells with and without stem activity. It modulates chronic inflammation, reducing the tumorigenesis. So chronic inflammation is the bed in which tumorigenic cells live and basically breed. But here what's happening is the statins are reducing this chronic inflammation, the bed, and it's basically reducing the tumorigenic potential of the cancer that is driving or being driven by the inflammation. So that's looking at the hallmarks of cancer, and that's looking at how statins are specifically, precisely being used or can be used, doesn't mean they always are, can be used to target very specific factors as it relates to cancer. So let me give you an example of how we might use this in a clinical setting. We have the ability to test VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. So we test that in the blood, and if it's elevated, well, guess what? That is an indication where you could actually use a statin therapy. Now, dosing, all of that is outside of that process, but there is showing you the indication. Let's say you look at cytokines. You see elevated interleukin 10, which is immunosuppressive. You see elevated 6, which is going to stimulate an anti-tumor immune environment. All of this can be targeted with statin therapy, and it's indicated of its use being clinically indicated. That is statins. But now I want to focus on statins as it relates to the tumor microenvironment. Again, the 7 specialized niches or environments is the hypoxic niche, the immune niche, the metabolic niche, the acidic niche, the innervated niche, the mechanical niche, and the microbial niche. And each microenvironment niche has unique cholesterol dependent mechanisms that influence the tumor progression potential and the therapeutic response. So the hypoxic niche, we already talked about the hallmarks of cancer, and hypoxia is a key hallmark of cancer. Here we come back to the hypoxia-inducible factor 1 alpha and the steroid regulatory elemental binding protein 2 and the crosstalk, because The hypoxia-inducible factor 1 alpha being triggered, that is the transcription of it, by the hypoxia, promoting the sterile regulatory elemental binding protein, which is upregulated in many of the cancer types as I previously described. This will increase cholesterol biosynthesis, promoting and sustaining cancer stemness, so promoting the plasticity, the adaptability, the reprogrammability of cancer cells from a stem to non-stem to stem activity, and this is driven by, hypoxia. And this enhances the mevalonate pathway, and this supports the adaptability of the cancer's metabolism and immune evasion, as well as its adaptability to the presence or lack thereof of oxygen. The 24-hydroxycholesterol is a hypoxic signal. It recruits the neutrophils, and of course the hypoxic environment, which is being driven by all of this, is then promoting the macrophage type 1 and macrophage type 2, which creates an immunosuppressive and immune evasion environment. It also recruits the neutrophils to do the same thing. So it's recruiting both macrophages and neutrophils to promote a immunosuppressive environment, but here with the neutrophils, it actually is facilitating the angiogenic switch. So all of this is and can be targeted by the statins, but I'm describing here the many different mechanisms that are all happening simultaneously. It's not a sequence, it's all happening at the same time. And understand within the tumor microenvironment, even though we describe these 7 different categories of the tumor microenvironment, these are all scattered around. Cancer and tumors and tumor microenvironments are not homogeneous. They're not all the same. They're all going to have unique environments within that. That's called heterogeneity. So in looking at the immune environment, what we know as it relates to cholesterol, cholesterol is essential for T cell activation and proliferation, again, via the same sterile or SREBP dependent pathways. ACAT inhibition actually enhances TCR or T cell receptor clustering. And we also see that excess extracellular cholesterol drives the CD8 T cells exhaustion and dysfunction. So you can see what's happening here is cholesterol is essential for basically creating an environment of upregulation of proteins that downregulates the immune system's ability to both see and attack and destroy or trigger apoptosis of cancer cells. Now we also know that in B cell regulation, the same sterile regulatory elemental binding protein actually is key in B cell maturation and function. So what we can see here is a shift because of the altered metabolism associated with cancer, the upregulation of the general pyrophosphate metabolic intermediate. It's actually skewing the regulatory B cells into an immunosuppressive type to actually promote interleukin-2, which suppresses the immune system. And this dampens the anti-tumor immune activity. Cholesterol metabolism is going to reshape and contribute to this immunosuppressant. The statins can come in and actually block that. Now, when we talk about the myeloid cell reprogramming, here we're talking again about the neutrophils that drive the angiogenesis, the tumor-associated macrophages, M1, M2, the same type of process, all driving immunosuppressive. And here it's cancer-programmed cholesterol efflux that is altering this myeloid cell plasticity or function. It's reprogramming the immune system via these immune cells within the tumor microenvironment, and thus we can attack with statins these same mechanisms of action. Now, other tumor microenvironment niches would include the metabolic microenvironments that statins can be used to target by targeting the PI3K-AKT-mTOR signaling, and this is the pathway by which cancer will maintain proliferation, growth potential in nutrient stress conditions. And here the statins can target that, so when a cancer cell is under stress, the more we stress it, the more it's culpable to die. The acidic environment, cancer's got an interesting mixture. It has an outside environment, outside the tumor and the cells that are more acidic. And that's because of the altered metabolism of the cancer cells actually producing hydrogen ions and lactate. And this is dumped outside of the cell. This actually creates an acidic buffer, but actually leaves the internal of the cell more alkaline. Now, I've seen a lot of people talk about how, I saw a post this weekend on social media. Somebody said cancer cell feeds on acid. It's like, that's like so wrong. The acidic and alkalinity changes are a byproduct of the altered metabolism plasticity associated with cancer. But you have to understand that the whole body is not acidic. What we're talking about here is, again, heterogeneous environments. The acidic environment exists right outside the cell and actually creates a buffer, but it's a byproduct of the altered or the reprogrammed metabolism of the cancer inside. And so what this is going to do is this fosters invasion and migration. This is, again, it's coupled to the abnormal cell metabolism, the glycolysis, the Warburg effect, and the production of lactic acid. And cholesterol metabolism is driving the cancer cell's adaptability, plasticity, to meet the demands of the environment, whether that's nutrient excess, nutrient depletion, acidic, alkaline, whatever. Now, the innervated niche is not really explored much, so we're going to move on from that. Now, the mechanical microenvironment, we have to understand cholesterol plays a key role in cell membranes. Here, it's regulating adhesion and motility signals associated with invasion and the response to physical constraints within the tumor microenvironment. So it's not just cells, but it's a network of extracellular matrix, a framework by which these communications within the tumor microenvironment, these cells are interacting. Now, when we look at the microbial microenvironment, which is a very early discovery as it relates to the impact on cancer, the gut microbiome and the microbial environment within the tumor, we're just beginning to understand the cholesterol metabolism and its effect here. Dietary cholesterol alters the gut microbiome composition. So what you eat affects the microbiome and the metabolite, that is things like small chain fatty acids within the gut. And this is going to impact inflammatory signaling through things like toll-like receptor type 4, altering the tumor microenvironment, and also altering the gut metabolism, altering the presence of the gut metabolites. So microbial-related metabolites, such as bile acids, these actually have been shown to influence the potential for carcinogenesis of the liver, hepatic carcinogenesis, basically through alteration of T cell and macrophage polarization. Again, cholesterol is key to the adaptability and plasticity to the immune system, enabling survival and evasion of the cancer cell to the immune system. So it's this bidirectional crosstalk among the diet, the microbes in the gut, and in the tumor that is driving sterol metabolism to allow it to be adaptable and reprogrammed to its environment. So the therapeutic opportunities by targeting cholesterol homeostasis exist in the biosynthesis or synthesis inhibition, the uptake and efflux modulation, the esterification targeting, the trafficking disruption, and the combination strategies with chemotherapy, radiation, immunotherapy, and I would say others. So let's look at the targeting of the biosynthesis, the mevalonate pathway. So when we look at the lipophilic statins, these are statins that love fat. They are going to be the best performers that relates to statins in targeting of cancers. They show stronger anti-cancer activities and thus more direct anti-proliferative action and more resensitization to tumor cells or cancer cells to chemotherapy and radiation. They've also been shown to, here lipophilic statins, to be synergistic with chemotherapy doxorubicin and irinotecan in enhancing radiosensitivity via the hypoxia-inducible factor 1 alpha reduction. So it's reducing the hypoxia signaling and thus increasing the sensitivity to radiation. Also looking at bisphosphonates. These are medications that you may have heard of as it relates to thin bones. And remember, we talked about the osteotropism as it relates to osteoblasts and osteoclasts, how cholesterol synthesis plays a role in allowing the accelerated breakdown of bone, allowing cancer cells to get into bone. Here, with statins with bisphosphonates show combination or synergistic effects with chemotherapeutics like paclitaxel. So by targeting the biosynthesis, which statins should we focus on? Or overall, which statins should we look at? Leading human evidence, clinical evidence, tells us atorvastatin is the best. It reduces proliferation and cell cycle. Simvastatin is probably number 2. Close second, its pro-apoptotic effects really shine in breast cancer studies, and its anti-metastatic actions are really beneficial in preclinical models, and this has improved outcomes overall in population studies. Fluvastatin, probably number 3, reduces tumor proliferation and increases apoptosis, programmed cell death, and it's been shown to inhibit metastasis pathway or the cascade in triple-negative breast cancer models, here being in vitro. Pitavastatin, randomized controlled trials combined with neoadjuvant chemotherapy in breast cancer resulted in greater tumor shrinkage and favorable biomarker shifts favoring apoptosis and inhibiting proliferation. And then lovastatin, preclinical studies showing it induces apoptosis and chemosensitization. So what I would tell you is the 2 best, atorvastatin number 1, simvastatin number 2. So what about targeting the uptake, efflux, and esterification? We talked about the biosynthesis, but here we're talking about uptake, efflux, and esterification. Well, when we look at statins, we have to look at liver X receptors or LXR agonists. Here we're combining statins with LXR agonists. And what this is going to do is reduce LDR expression, limiting cholesterol uptake by the cancer cells, thus reducing its plasticity and reprogrammability. Here also it's going to inhibit, statins that is, in conjunction with PCSK9, it's going to improve CD8 T cell infiltration and thus improve immune checkpoint blockade response. So it's going to improve conventional immunotherapy. So these are different classes of drugs. Liver LXR agonists or liver X receptors, as well as PCSK9 inhibitors. These are different classes of drugs that statins could be used in conjunction with. Same thing as when looking at ACAT or ACAT inhibitors. This increases CD8 T cell infiltration into lung cancer cells, turning it from a cold tumor immune environment to a hot tumor immune environment. And this also has been shown to enhance CAR T activity in preclinical models. So looking at the combination strategies in specific nature, simvastatin plus doxorubicin has been shown to increase apoptosis in breast cancer. Simvastatin plus irinotecan has been shown to increase growth inhibition in prostate cancer. Gemzar or gemcitabine plus pitavastatin is synergistic in pancreatic cancer models. Atorvastatin enhances radiosensitivity via reduction in hypoxia-inducible factor 1 alpha, which is driven by hypoxia. Atorvastatin reduces 5-fluorouracil-induced leukopenia, reduced white blood cells, and fatastatin mitigates tamoxifen-associated hepatic or liver steatosis. So fatty liver, here fatastatin actually mitigates tamoxifen-associated or driven fatty liver. So the primary hallmarks of cancer are targeted by statins are immune evasion, invasion metastasis, angiogenesis, hypoxia, treatment resistance, and microbiome modulation. See, when we use statins, or when we should use statins, we shouldn't be just throwing them on the wall and hope they stick. Everybody gets this statin, everybody gets this antibiotic, everybody gets this anti-parasite, everybody gets this anti-metabolic. But that's what's been done, is people have become disillusioned, patients have become disillusioned with a protocol-driven conventional medicine strategy as it relates to cancer. Everybody gets the same treatment, no matter if somebody's 6'6", 366 pounds, or somebody's 5'2", 125 pounds. They're getting the same treatment. They're getting the same strategy. But when we leave that, step back from that and say we need to do better, and then we do the exact same thing, but just with a different strategy, we're falling trapped to the same problem. And here we have to understand when we want to use statins, let's use them when we see evidence of cancer evading the immune system, when we want to target invasion in the metastatic process, when we want to target angiogenesis and hypoxia. So if we see VEGF elevated, if we see CEA elevated, these are all markers of angiogenesis, engage with statin therapy. If we see treatment resistance, whether that be with chemotherapy, radiation, if we see upregulated PD-L1 and we want to reduce that, and we're having a lack of response to immune checkpoint inhibiting therapies, or if we see altered gut microbiome, statins can help us to actually be targeted and precise in their utilization. That's the science. Again, check out the show notes. So what are the challenges with statins? Of course, the side effects, and we'll talk about those more in just a second, but it's the specificity, because cancer is a very heterogeneous process. We used to think that cancer is just a solid ball of cells isolated from the rest of the body, but we now know it's very heterogeneous. The tumor heterogeneity and the ability to use statins in a very precise manner is challenging, whether that be within all breast cancers, whether that be within the different types of tumor models. It's just, there's great challenges there. And this is why it's so important to have somebody that's knowledgeable in the utilization of statins to understand their specificity, to understand their indication as it relates to the hallmarks of cancer and those tumor niches, as well as the heterogeneity of the tumor and how to mix those in. We also obviously know the adverse events associated with statins. That's the hepatotoxicity, liver toxicity, the impacts on the brain, and myalgias, of course, insulin, which we'll talk about in just a second. And of course, you can't lose track of the drug-to-drug interaction. Statins can actually do this. I'm not saying that statins are the panacea, that statins are the holy grail. I think it's important to understand that. What I'm saying here is statins can have a very precise and indicated purpose, but that doesn't mean everybody can benefit from them. And in fact, patient selection is very important to ensure that you don't create unintended consequences that are negative. Of course, statins deplete micronutrients, CoQ10 is one, and the oral pharmacokinetics, the lipophilic, are going to be better than the non-lipophilic. So when we look at stats in the gut microbiome, we have to understand that the statins are actually, they're not necessarily altering the taxa of the bacteria that are present there. They're reprogramming the microbial metabolomic potential there, primarily be the trimethylamine and trimethylamine in oxide chemistry, the balance there. And it's not really changing the microbes there, it's actually changing the balance of the microbial metabolism. It actually lowers the dysbiotic states. Dysbiosis was actually at the American Society of Clinical Oncology back in May. We were providing updated on our phase 1 prostate cancer trial for intratumoral ablation and immunotherapy. And one of the panel leaders there from a premier oncology university, she said 20% of the audience there was dysbiotic, and that means imbalanced bacteria. Found that interesting because there's no standardized definition of what dysbiosis is. And in fact, we have no idea what a normal gut microbiome in a human is anymore, let alone what is then a standard definition of dysbiosis. So basically, a premier oncologist at an institution just whole cloth threw out a percentage that has zero science to support one iota, and yet everybody left out of there going, wow, 20% of dysbiotic. Yeah, baloney. So here, what's happening is by restoring a balanced gut bacteria and reducing dysbiotic state, we're going to actually reduce systemic inflammation. You're going to restore the gut epithelial integration, reduce the transmission of inflammation from the gut into the systemic circulation. We also understand that the pharmacomicrobiomics and personalization, it's the future. The baseline microbiome balance, the baseline microbiome population is very much going to be used to target which drugs, which therapies to use. Here, not just repurposed medications, here, not just statins, but therapies in general. And this will allow us to say, here's the environment of the gut, we're going to give statins, and so as an impact because of this environment, we're going to give this statin, whereas this person has this environment in their gut, we're going to use this statin. That is the precise nature of where we're going in the future. That is the personalization that we're going to in the future with the use of cancer therapies. Here we're talking about repurposed medications. And of course, the metabolism, everybody wants to focus on the gut microbiome, the bacteria. We have to understand that the metabolic links play an interesting and very important role here, particularly as it relates to insulin resistance. I want to talk, before we talk about insulin resistance, on statins and micronutrients. Of course, it depletes CoQ10, but understand that also sensitizes it to treatment. If we add CoQ10, we have to be aware that it does protect the healthy cells, but it can lower the sensitivity of the cancer cells to treatment. It also upregulates or increases vitamin D levels. It reduces vitamin K2 levels and reduces selenium levels, though the studies really there are limited on the selenium depletion. So when we look at statins and insulin resistant, what I've often told patients is that if somebody's taken a statin and they're borderline insulin resistant, they will become insulin resistant. If they're insulin resistant, they will become a diabetic. If they are diabetic, they'll become a worse diabetic or maybe an insulin requiring diabetic. So we have to look at patient selection when we're talking about statins here. So when we look at statins, the host-centric, it targets the hepatic and muscle mechanism by reducing insulin signaling. It reduces the adiponectin. It reduces GLUT4, which is how sugar is uptaken. So all of this is going to reduce the insulin sensitivity. It's going to increase insulin resistance. It's going to increase glucose level. And as that insulin level goes up, you also get an increased inflammatory production. And of course, it's also going to reduce coenzyme CoQ10, which is going to impair the mitochondria, which is going to further elevate all of that. So we're going to get a buildup of oxidation, inflammation, elevated glucose, which is pro-oxidation. So you can see in the wrong environment of the individual, statins could be actually a bad choice, whereas in another individual, it could be a very good choice. So this is why it's so important to understand these must be precisely used with somebody knowledgeable in the utilization of these repurposed medications. Of course, inflammation and lipotoxicity, cholesterol efflux disruption by statins promotes the lipid drop accumulation. Let me back up a little bit. Inflammation and lipotoxicity. Cholesterol efflux promotes lipid droplet accumulation and ectopic fat disruption. This triggers pro-inflammatory production. okay? When we get accumulation of fat, fat is not inert. And what happens when we get cholesterol efflux, we get accumulation of fat, this ectopic fat deposition. A lot of us think about our love handles. This is not metabolically inert. It's actually very pro-inflammatory. It's hormonally manipulative. It promotes TNF-alpha, interleukin 6, and this interferes further with insulin signaling, actually increasing insulin resistance, reducing insulin sensitivity. And in fact, when you look at a condition called metabolic endotoxemia, this is dysbiosis and gut microbiome imbalance that's promoting systemic inflammation via things like interleukin 1 beta and interleukin 6, actually promoting insulin sensitivity by reducing insulin, promoting insulin resistance by reducing insulin sensitivity and actually causing type 2 diabetes, actually coming from the gut. People go, well, diabetes is caused by sugar. It's caused by inflammation, just wherever that source is. Here they're talking about inflammation that's being driven by the accumulation of fat droplets in the ectopic fat deposition. But again, the gut microbiome dependent mechanisms are also driving this same process. We get reduced butyrate bacteria, and this impairs the ability to update and regulate the glucose, update and regulate the insulin levels as well. So here, a fecal transplant from statin treated mice transferred to mice actually restored insulin sensitivity. So when it comes to the gut microbiome dependent mechanisms, we have to understand that it's not just the inflammation coming from the fat cells, but it's inflammation that's coming from the gut microbiome that's driving and potentiating systemic inflammation. See, we know that statins reduce butyrate producing bacteria, which are beneficial bacteria, and this impairs GLP-1 release. It's impairing insulin function, impairing glucose homeostasis. Now, this here in steps the potential for a fecal transplant. See, a fecal microbiome transplant from mice that were treated with statins were transferred to mice that were not. Those mice developed insulin resistance. So statins develop insulin resistance in mice, as in humans. So what they did is they took a fecal transplant from mice that were given statins that induced insulin resistance. Then they gave the feces to the mice that didn't have insulin resistance. They developed it, but it was because of the statins, and it was transferred from one mice group to the next. It's powerful. That's how powerful fecal transplant is. So it's not just about the immune system. That's how we use it in the colon. Okay, it's very important, anaerobic bacteria. But here it's about altering metabolism. This is where other research has shown when you give a fecal transplant orally, you get off-target colonization, and this alters metabolism. That's why we see what we see here in this model. This is why we like to do fecal transplants via an enema. We don't want to do it orally because of that risk of off-target colonization actually promoting altered metabolism and altered inflammation. Now, meta-analysis of randomized clinical controlled trials show statins are associated with a 9 to 12% increased risk of new onset diabetes. Again, patient selection. I'm not saying statins are without risk. They definitely have them. What I'm saying is in a precise indicated way, statins can be very beneficial. I mean, when we're talking about obesity, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetics, statins have to be watched very closely. So in conclusion, cholesterol metabolisms, and statins provides an opportunity for a vulnerability that is in cancer. Cholesterol dysregulation contributes to multiple hallmarks of cancer, as we've discussed, and it's not sequential, it's not one at a time, it's simultaneously. And this provides high-value, precise targeting with statins. At the same time, the tumor microenvironment is involved here. Effective therapy increasingly requires not a tumor-centric model, but a microenvironment-centric model. Understanding that the environment is what is in many ways driving the tumor survival and thriving. And by pivoting there, understanding that the environment is influenceable, statin is a therapeutic, is a repurposed medication that can allow us to influence that environment. Of course, repurposed medications, therapies in cancer serve an individual best when used in combination, when used in stacking. Here, cholesterol has been shown with chemotherapy, with radiation, with immunotherapies to work more effectively. And of course, as I said, careful patient selection, careful patient monitoring are imperative. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Nathan Goodyear, on this Off-ScriptRX podcast. This is a solo podcast. You know, the majority of the people watching our podcast and watching all podcasts per industry standards are not subscribers. So please do me a favor. I encourage you to please subscribe to the Off-ScriptRX podcast or go over to the Pre-Scribe podcast or Prescribed podcast by Dr. Nathan Goodyear. Check out the info below where you can get actually links, hyperlinks to those areas, the Off-ScriptRX podcast as well as the Prescribed podcast. You can subscribe and please share to others out there that would benefit from this podcast and the information from this podcast. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you on the next Off-ScriptRX podcast.
Your health deserves more than a one-size-fits-all approach. Subscribe now and share this episode to help others break away from outdated treatments. Visit offscriptrx.com to see how repurposed medications can fit into your personal cancer care strategy. Don't settle. Take action and join the movement to rewrite the future of medicine. Rethink repurposing medications. Rethink reality.